Today, I'm just going to do a little bit of the news. So, I actually don't think it's all that healthy to read the news every day, and most of it's kind of drivel or like emotionally charged. So, I sort of think, well, I only really want to look at the news once a week. And then what I've got in the habit of doing is using a bunch of those little, those special Google search terms you use where you use like term or search term or search term and search term, all of that kind of stuff. So I constructed a couple of these little Google scripts, I guess they're called, and I search through the results for what I think are generally relevant articles, and then I'll rescan again. And it tends to be fairly good, and you get a very wide selection. But in order to pick out all the stuff, you kind of have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the results and pick out all the different ones. And you'll usually get maybe a dozen or 2 dozen stories that are particularly significant. Um, and so I thought I'd go through with them. And then what I've done as well is on a couple of the stories that I think need a bit more detail and explanation because they're kind of, how should I put it? They tend to be a bit detail heavy, sort of deep for example, the three articles that I thought needed a bit more focus, actually four, now that I include the BEE regulations, the new ones that are being proposed. They're not yet in force, not to worry. And there is a reasonable chance they're going to be able to be challenged in court. So, but still very worrying. What I would say over here is that the three stories that I thought needed expansion on, one was new electricity regulations. Now, what they're saying, broadly speaking, is that they're going to introduce new electrical regulations that are. Let me see if I can find this in my, because I've got little summaries over here, and then I've got extra notes down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and have a look quite quickly. And here we go, the independent power production edition. So, okay, well, there's some statistics, green hydrogen projects. Here we go, electricity rules. So there's new proposed rules which are supposed to address technical losses and leakages, caps and international standards, and breaches of these will risk the private partners losing their licenses. And there's a whole bunch of little things that they're going to try and punish private partners for. And so what you're going to sort of think is, okay, well, that sounds good. It means that you're reducing corruption, you're increasing the quality of service delivery. But there's a little catch, and this is kind of important. So in 2005, the country drew up public-private partnership regulations to, align with what's perceived to be good international practice. They were slightly more generous than the international standard. Let's put it like that. Not much, but it's a little bit worse. So there are clauses in our law now, which sort of there's we're called unforeseeable conduct clause and change in law. So now these form the standard part of all public-private partnerships in South Africa, and the way it impacts this particular sector is that an absolutely eye-watering number of really, really large contracts that extend for 20, 30 years in most cases have already been signed. So the bulk of now it's called the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. So it spells rape with 4 P's. I mean, it's a very, very, very clumsy acronym. So they're doing these 20-year contracts, right? Now, all of these, because of the regulations on public-private partnerships, mean that the new regulations that are going to discipline anyone who tries to sign a public-private partnership with NERSA or ESCOM, those don't impact any of the existing contracts. They have an exemption. Any losses that they would experience from adhering to these new rules are covered by the government. So they're completely grandfathered in and don't actually have to adhere to any of this. It's quite remarkable. So this is over 100 projects across bid windows 1 to 6. That's like most of the past couple of years, and yeah, I just don't think that people in the investment sector really sort of know. Well, I'm pretty sure there's a large number of people who are in this area who see it coming, but these are sort of aspects of governance that are completely invisible to most people. We're going to go like, oh, is DA or ANC better? But you're asking yourself, well, how is business actually conducted politically? And frankly, it's completely outside of this sort of talk of DA and ANC. And you never ever see the DA bringing up a question of should this be redrawn? Should the public-private partnership framework include more responsibility on the part of the private partner? I mean, the private partner, let me just see if I can get the wording right. So now, under the REIPPPP, all of these companies that have signed on, they're going to get additional government support for payment obligations, especially if the consumer fails to pay. Now, the consumer is the public, right? Or in many cases, it'll also be industrial companies. So the government's sort of pretty much guaranteeing them revenue. And if there's any default on a contract, they'll be allowed to attach the government for the full remainder of operating costs, capital expenditures, labor, and equity compensation. So that's a big lot. I thought that one needed some notes because I thought it was an incredible little detail. So you'll notice a news story and it'll seem kind of dull, but then once it comes up, you sort of say, well, okay, if you know a little bit more context, they gain, these meaningless little stories gain an extraordinary amount of significance. And for me, what it says is, okay, they've now introduced a risk factor to anyone who wants to enter the market now that all of the establishment payers have had a bite of the apple. And it's not the only way that they're pulling up the ladder for established donor class oligarchs in South Africa. One of the obvious things that you see with the BEE procurement deal that's just been struck. Now, the specific regulations surrounding this, let me see if I can bring it up because I put it down here. There we go, draft procurement regulations. Right. So it's the Treasury's published a draft public procurement regulations. Now, I don't know what they're really aiming to do, whether they're going to use this as an anchor to put a more moderate position in play or whether they're really trying to go for gold. Because from the comments from Sakelicha, who honestly, if you're going to look to anyone who's got, there are very few organizations, pretty much none, which are more serious and practically oriented than Sakelicha. So if they say something's legally viable or not, they're generally probably the most reliable. Just like NEASA in many ways is the most reliable on employers' rights and the labor sector. And they've also had comment on the story. But this has caused a big stink because what the government's trying to do is make sure that any contract that's under 20 million rand has to be given to a 100% black company. Now, the wording is kind of tricky, and I've had trouble trying to wrap my head around this wording a little bit because it says that the procuring institutions, whether they're national, provincial, or local, right? They must set aside certain procurements exclusively for BEE, right? And there's like all of the lists, like, black women, women, persons with disabilities, blah, 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 blah. So they've got that usual sort of enormously clunky long list. But then they say that the qualified bidders must demonstrate 100% ownership. So they're saying they must set aside certain procurements. How many procurements? It's hard to tell. So what they're saying is that qualified bidders, okay, they've got to be 100% black owned, okay. So not even like 90% black owned qualify, right? And they're saying if no qualifying bids are received after reasonable efforts, the institution must re-advertise or proceed without the preference. So there is a little backdoor here. Now, this is very interesting because one of the main problems that they had when they lost the 2017 regulations, so that was successfully challenged, is the point is that if race becomes a sort of a hard absolute condition of entry rather than an evaluation factor, then it fails, because then generally speaking, the courts have the attitude that constitutes unfair discrimination. Whereas there's this whole sort of gray area that they say, yeah, no, that's fair discrimination. So now the question is whether this little sort of, okay, if you can't find a black partner, then, whatever we'll do, the next best thing we'll do, that might allow them to sort of squeak this past the courts. But if you think about what it means in practicality, is that this is going to impact most municipal contracts. So municipal service contracts. And I mean, one of the interesting things is you get a lot of these contracts that are, if the contract is worth, I think the threshold's 200,000 Rand. If it's less than that, then you don't actually have to tender for it. So municipalities can run a lot of these kind of micro contracts for small friends and family in their districts and get away with it because it doesn't have to be tendered. Like if you have to have a cleaner come and sweep out an outdoor, quickly sweep out a building, there's something's messed in, I don't know. That kind of contract doesn't need to be tendered for. So there's a lot of that corruption. But what they've now got is this thing where, okay, under 20 million, it's actually a huge number of contracts. And anyone can, throw together a company quickly and then hire subcontractors, right? Well, not anyone, but if the system is made for this, then anyone can. And so you've got a guy who can probably slap together a company and then say, well, look, I've got this partner who's been a tenderpreneur for quite a while, so clearly he has experience in the industry. And then you hire a consultant, they draw up some specs to match the tender, and then you just subcontract for it at a high premium. And because you're 100% black, you've now got, because of course the DA never challenge procurement policy on this point, even though they would be perfectly constitutionally allowed to. Look, under certain arguments, it gets kind of complicated if you want to try and argue why what I'm proposing here is, strictly speaking, a consequence of the 2022 court ruling against the Tsakeliga one in this in the procurement sector. But it's a reading that I've got from talking to them and other lawyers that has, I mean, I've been sort of nattering about for quite a while, where basically the court mandates value for money, BEE doesn't have the same level of mandate, so there's an interpretation based, a combination with a different ruling from Judge Zondo, where, okay, if you're opening up the bid, you can say, oh, well, this guy's definitely the best value for money objectively, so we're going to go with him regardless of his BEE status. Now, it's not like that's open and obvious and it's out there in one single court ruling. It requires the combined reading of two different court rulings. But what it does is it opens up the potential for attempting to take advantage of this. No one's going to do this. So because no one's going to do this, because there's no political will to do this, what will happen if this particular regulation goes through is that even in DA run areas, any black person who is capable of filing the correct paperwork can capture any single service delivery opportunity below 20 million rand. That's a huge amount of stuff. They can completely just delete the service delivery across DA run areas overnight. It's going to be very hard, and there's going to be a lot of it's going to create an enormous number of legal contestations on that specific clause, which says, if you can't find a qualified person, then, and then they're going to go, well, is this black owned company qualified or not? That's going to become the bone of contention, and it's going to be very, very difficult, because if the application itself is, on paper correct, what is the basis going to be for denying them? It's difficult, right? So there's going to be a lot of skimming and a lot of substandard service that is going to happen across the board, and the DA is looking like they're not going to do anything about it. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of what I see from this matter. But I'm going to go and take Piet le Roux's word for it that it is challengeable, and I'm going to hold thumbs for that, because yeah, I mean, look, the new regulations also include stuff like also include stricter qualifications for the 20 million to 100 million rand window, and they also include new categories for contracts over 100 million. So contracts over 100 million must it's got things like 25% of the contract must be subcontracted to 100% owned black enterprises. So, and in the middle category, it's 40% of prior procurement spend. 30% must go to the 100% owned enterprises. So it's no matter which category you're going in, somebody gets to have a bite of the pie, and it includes any kind of properly established, BEE company. So all of those major oligarchs and the legacy institutions that have been gradually giving away shares through, wrong way structured loans to increase their BEE share, they're sort of like giving up on this bottom layer of government contracts. And I suspect, looking at the way that they're thinking, and especially the way that, there's a conversation I had with Theo de Jager when I was trying to look up this kind of stuff. When he talks about Agri-SA and Agribiz, the way that they handle the farmers is that they actually kind of mock them if they complain about expropriation stuff, and they say, well, look, it's coming for you. You better get with the program. Because the general understanding, most of the big members of these, organizations, they're level 1 BEE companies anyway. So they feel like they've indemnified themselves. And because BEE regulations apply more strictly to junior positions than senior positions, what the government has done is they've structured a system where they've allowed the sort of elder sort of generation in South Africa to be relatively untouched by BEE. Not completely untouched, but relatively untouched. And then it's harsher and harsher the younger you go, which is why all of the people who are most stringently defending BEE and employment equity, they tend to be quite old. So you think like Max de Pree and that list of 44, all of them are like in their 60s and 70s, right? And all of these other propaganda outlets, like Afrikaners vir Suid-Afrika, that little thing, they've got a little outlet it's also government aligned. It's also a little public relations outfit. So you've got these left-wing Afrikaners who are from a generation that's relatively untouched by these regulations at a personal level, whether it's in terms of ownership of companies, whether it's in terms of like job opportunities. They're kind of fine. And the younger you go, the worse it gets. I mean, the last employment equity stats that came out that are still being squabbled over put, junior positions that like you are not allowed to hire more than 4% of your workforce. They're not allowed to be white males. And I mean, if you consider the differences in educational attainment, it's like it's absurd, and the amount of positions available as well. Like it's just like saying to the vast majority of fellows like me, like, you cannot get hired under any circumstances. Please bugger off out of the country. That's the message, and it's very clear. So yeah, but the elder generation are generally much more complacent. It's fine, and then you tell them, well, we need to do something dramatic, and they tell you, yeah, but things are fine now, and like, we just need to keep the ANC out. Yeah, but do you know what I mean? It's that kind of complacent attitude of vote harder and alles sal reg kom, you know. Um, so yeah, no good. Um, anyway, so I thought let's move on to something less horrifically depressing and sort of just mildly interesting. So before I do the last roundup of the items that I'm going to skim, I just want to cover the story. So, like, there's a whole big reorganization of SADC going on at the moment, and I think I'll look at that a bit next week because they're not done with that. But right now we got South Africa and Zimbabwe, right? And South Africa and Zimbabwe have decided to strike, some trade deal at the moment, and they're going to remove some non-tariff barriers to trading with Zimbabwe. There's there's a lot of, especially in the retail sector, there's a lot of South Africans doing business over there. And because there's not a huge amount of regulation in Zimbabwe, there's it's as long as you stay really out of the political realm, you don't say anything or do anything political, you tend to be left alone. And by all accounts, it's fairly easy to make money if you've got some starting capital, right? So Zimbabwe is actually kind of booming a bit, but like most of the market is in a complete gray area. So much stuff is completely in cash. So it's a little bit Wild West out there, but it's much less violent than South Africa is. And there's a sort of politics invading everything, because the understanding over there is just don't do anything political and you're fine, because they've had sort of authoritarian political terror in recent memory, and so everyone understands how to keep quiet and keep their head down. So generally people do. Now, that said, so land of opportunity in some ways if you're brave enough. But this is mainly about the border posts, right? So they've also got at the moment we're trying to deport a lot of people. And so there's an agreement between the Department of Home Affairs and the Department of Prisons. There's also some little bits and pieces around agriculture and museums, because they don't have enough people who can run museums in that country. And then there's also some decorative gender stuff, so that they can give some useless people some useless stuff to do that pays them. Now, the prisons is about sort of coordinating transfers, because there's a lot of Zimbabweans in South African prisons and we want to get rid of them. So they're going over there. But we're also going to be training their staff, because they don't have very many trained staff in their prisons. Well, Peter Groenewald will sort that out. I didn't look into the agricultural stuff because it's sort of rats and mice stuff at the moment. But what I also thought is they're building the third Limpopo bridge. That's supposed to be a joint operation between the two of them. And then there's a bike bridge one-stop post that they're doing to make the trucks go a bit faster. They've got a fertilizer manufacturing plant that they're going to put together, an auto component manufacturing plant that's also going to be cross-border. And most of this is, as well as platinum group metals processing. Now, all of this is going to go into a cross-border special economic zone, which is going to have reduced tariffs and taxes and all kinds of stuff, right? And that's the Messina Mercado special economic zone, and they're going to tie things in that logistic chain into the special economic zone, right? Now, I sort of thought, well, you're not going to have something that big going down without someone benefiting, right? So all of it's being handed to something called the Baobab Commission. So in the Baobab Commission, there's a number of beneficiaries. Almost all of them, all of them are BEE, whatever. But the guy who's going to be scooping the most cream off the top is a fellow called Sizwe um, Tate. So he comes from the Department of Trade and Industry previously, and before that, the Department of Human Settlements, which is a fantastically lucrative department to come from because that's where all the construction bids go in. Now, what I find most amusing is that this is supposedly going to be overseen by the Department of Home Affairs, which means that Leon Schreiber is going to have to sit very quietly and watch the cadres scoop a huge amount of lucrative contracts from out of this, which I find mildly amusing. But yeah, so I'm just sort of I just thought I'd mention some of these details so we can keep an eye on what's going on over there. There's nothing too shocking, but I thought it's just good to sort of slowly kind of map out how business is done, because these big projects sort of happen and then we're going, okay, well, someone's skimming, but how's it done? Well, they have several shell companies. So you've got the Baobab Commission that's overseen by government departments, and then you've got 4 holding companies underneath that, and the main holding company is held by a senior ANC official who's managed to keep their head down and not become a household name. So you've got a lot of that going on, and I couldn't find out what was going on in all of those other holding companies in the time frame because I don't have a huge amount of time to spend on this one. But yeah, it's not for me the actual worst. The worst for me would be the green hydrogen stuff. So there's huge green hydrogen plants with millions and millions and millions that are being erected across South Africa, and there's funding from the European Union, there's funding from individual European companies, there's funding from the South African government, and they're putting this value chain through from the northern part of the Western Cape all the way through into Namibia. And the thing about this is that it makes absolutely no sense in terms of the raw physics or in terms of the economics of the endeavor at all. And the cost in terms of the cost to ordinary people in South Africa is going to be quite large because it consumes an enormous amount of water. Now, that would be fine if it was placed in KwaZulu-Natal or if it was placed in Limpopo, but it's based in the Northern Cape, which is the driest part of the country. You have problems over there where borehole water is so saline that it's undrinkable. And when I say saline, I don't mean it's like salty like the sea. I mean, it has so many solutes from various minerals in the soil that it's undrinkable. And it has to be very heavily treated before you can drink it. And so, I mean, truly arid. If you go on Google Maps and look at the Northern Cape, it's like the surface of Mars, right? Very, very, very sparsely populated area. The only farms that are out there for the most part is sheep farms, and you send them grazing over enormous distances. Now, green hydrogen has about 30 to 40% energy efficiency. And now, what that means is that the amount of energy sitting in that fuel cell, green hydrogen is like, okay, you compress hydrogen into this fuel cell, and then by releasing it and burning it, you get energy out of it, right? And to put that in there, they electrolyze water. And the power that you're putting in to electrolyze the water to create the hydrogen and then compress it into the fuel cell is 3 times more than the energy that you're actually getting out. It's by far the most bananas idea I could possibly come up with. Now, part of the reason for hydrogen fuel cells, in my understanding, is that part of it requires platinum catalysts. Now, the platinum sector in South Africa has taken a massive hit because of the drop in demand for catalytic converters in industrial combustion engines, internal combustion engines, so petrol cars and so on. And so our platinum sector has taken a bit of a beating. So they've been looking at all kinds of research and development in order to find ways of storing energy and so on for the new green energy revolution that's going to use platinum. Now, in my mind, I don't mind this. Great, have fun. There's some interesting ideas related to, I don't know, some industrial chemical manufacturing. There's some interesting ideas related to, what's it called? Can you think, Robert, for 5 seconds? There's ordinary batteries that they're like battery models that require platinum catalysts in them, but um, these are still in the research and development phase. They're not hugely commercial at the moment. What has been produced but is completely unprofitable is hydrogen fuel cells. And now they're getting all of these green subsidies from Europe, and the structure of it is that it's actually going to be a loan. So the Europeans are profiting off of this while draining our water supplies and just burning money and energy just into just into nothing. And especially if you consider our energy mix at the moment, I mean, let's say, for example, you are one of these people who highly prioritizes, carbon consumption or whatever. It really just isn't worth it. And I mean, this is ignoring the whole fact of the whole story where, Germany funding green NGOs in South Africa to sue the government to prevent the construction of coal-fired power plants, gas turbine power plants, all kinds of stuff, right? They even got in the way of us building a nuclear power plant some years ago, famously. Jacob Zuma wanted to get the Russian company Rosatom to build some huge trillion rand nuclear power plant up north somewhere. And okay, cool. It would have cost an obscene amount of money, but if it was built, we would have gotten rid of load shedding several years before we did. Not that load shedding is completely over, but it's mostly nearing the end of the tunnel. And the way that that's happened is simply that the private sector has built enough of their own electrical supply that they took the load off the system. The things that are remaining that can't be done efficiently are metal smelting and auto manufacturing and things like that, which are very expensive and very energy intensive and require a very stable base load. So that's the stuff that got hit the hardest by that whole process. And so all of this green hydrogen stuff, I mean, ordinary battery technology is far more efficient. I mean, the energy efficiency that you're getting from that, from energy in, energy out, 70 to 90%. Heat pumps, in terms of how much heat you're getting in and out, I mean, it's a completely different. I'm comparing apples to oranges now, but you get 200 to 400% energy efficiency out of those. Like, you actually produce shift more heat because you're also working off the ambient temperature in the atmosphere. So assuming you're heating or cooling an office or a home, it's fantastically more efficient. Not that that's what green hydrogen is for, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And this is just where we're going. It's there's so many of these boondoggles around where people are just burning cash at an absolutely stratospheric rate. Why are we engaging in this money sink? I don't know. Why isn't it a bigger news item? I don't know. I guess the DA seems to think this is a grand idea for some god-awful reason, or they'd be challenging the ANC on it. I think the Vryheidsfront might actually get a little bit of mileage in the Northern Cape out of making an issue out of this, but they tend to drop the ball on these things a lot, even if it's low-hanging fruit for them. And I don't know why their communication strategy doesn't include this. Now, I have covered most of the sort of more detailed topics now. I'm going to do two little sort of rundowns, and I've produced little sort of short summaries of a whole bunch of different news stories just to round this out. And the two lists that I've got going are just general South Africa stuff, and the other one is what's happening with Sakeliga, Solidarity, AfriForum, those guys. And then I'm going to just quickly hit a couple of opinion articles. um, you know, for just to add a bit of color. And I think one of the ones that I'm definitely going to do is the common sense, because they released an article that I think it irritated me a lot, and I've been working on something in response to that I'm going to try and send them hopefully tomorrow morning. But we shall see. And then, hopefully, just while it's on my mind, um, three quick things. So I'm working on an article right now on the collapse of Ingrain SA, which is a subsidiary of Tongaat, Hewlett, and Barlow World. So now these are very, very big companies. They've been around for like a century, and big in the sugar manufacturing and food refining and all this kind of stuff. Barlow World has done all kinds of stuff with construction and so on. And now Ingrain SA, back in the day, it used to be known as African Products, and they make a lot of things like glucose and binding starches and all kinds of things that you refine from maize. And they are not doing so lacquer. So I spoke to a number of former employees to get like a really nice technical breakdown, and hopefully I'll be able to get that off to Biz News or someone like that tomorrow, and we'll see how that goes. But it's a fun article if you like getting into the details of how Black economic empowerment can destroy the private sector. So I'm going to do that. You should be seeing that up maybe this week sometime. Someone will take it because I know it's. I don't submit a lot of articles, and I know this one's good. And then I did a recent article on my Substack, which you can get in the description for this video, which is covering the history of our involvement in the conflict in the Congo. It doesn't go into too much detail on the conflict from like 10, 15 years ago, our involvement then, because we were part of the UN peacekeeping force. And so we weren't really in charge of our affairs. But the war that broke out in 2023, 24, very, very different ambit. We were not there as a peacekeeping force, but as an actual defensive military conflict, war fighting force. And we lost horrendously. So why were we involved? What were we doing there? What went wrong? How embarrassing is it? Very nice, long, very detailed article there on Substack if you're willing to subscribe. Although I'm not, I must just double check. I think people who subscribe for free do get access to one or two articles. I'm not sure what that is. I must just check. But one more quick shill again before I move on to news items is that I have published a book. I read in the previous stream that I did, I read the first 2 chapters of that. And from that stream, I got about a dozen people buying copies. So that's nice. That sort of increased the pile of sales. At the moment, it's still just an ebook. I have submitted it to Jonathan Ball, and I had a very polite conversation with someone who worked from there, in which I refrained from trying to push my book on her and just asked for some general advice. And what I was told was that I'll only really hear back in October, and the printing run comes in February. So if I get and releasing it first on Amazon as an ebook is not going to count against me. So if they pick it up, which I very much hope they do, it should appear on bookshelves sometime in the middle of next year. The last printing run we had, what's that guy's name? Dan Corder. I noticed he had a book coming out this year. I'm not too much of a fan of his, but it just, to sort of give you a mile marker for the time frame. It only came out, I think, this month. And considering that their printing run begins in February, it's sort of, okay, well, this book saying the DA is... The thing is, they're not complete garbage. They're fairly competent in a number of ways, but my argument is very simply, they're not going to be able to save the country in their current form. So there's a lot of arguments in there, and I detail a lot of it because the opening chapters that I read in the previous stream cover the whole argument of the book, and you pretty much get the outline right from the beginning, and then the rest is explaining and justifying. So I wanted to respect the reader to some degree, and rather than saying, "Ooh, you got to read to the end to catch the punchline," although actually in a way you do, because the second last chapter focuses on uh, the how much it'll cost to fix Johannesburg, which eek. And this, from an accountant's perspective, it'll look like a very crude back of the envelope calculation, but it's the best that I can do without getting sort of like a very professional audit of public sector contracts. So it's the best. It's more or less the best that I could do. At any rate, go buy the book. Put some money in my pocket, and enjoy me trying to eliminate all of the arguments standing in the way of secession. Um, but that's by the by. I think I do have another book in the pipeline, and much of it's already been written, but it requires an absolutely Herculean amount of editing, and that'll be on why South Africa can't be saved, and that's sort of building theories of how power relations work in South Africa, and demonstrating sort of examples of institutional inertia and demographic change and race relations and all of that stuff, right? And then that should hopefully be finished middle of next year. Although probably sooner if I can find the time and discipline myself enough. And then I've got a third book, which I haven't even started, but the concept is there, and that's basically sort of the case for secession and devolution, and how we're going to get there and what it'll look like and things like that, right? So that's the idea of having a trilogy of books on the topic out before the general election in 2029. And I should hit the target with about a year to spare if I'm fairly diligent. Okay, and then I have some other interesting book ideas that I can get to finally. Now, all the shilling is out of the way, and let's go to right. So first we have the South African Communist Party is having some tension with the ANC because they decided recently that they were going to contest elections separately from the ANC, which they have never done. They've always been part of the same ticket, and then they have seats allocated based on whatever. Now, the guy in charge of the Communist Party at the moment is this very uncharismatic guy called Solly Mapaila. And so when he was talking to Pop Crew, which is the labor union in the police in Boksburg, so he talked about like the government imposing austerity. Ooh. And talked about the GNU's composition and blah, 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 complaining about neoliberalism, the usual gas. And he got backing from Pop Crew, which is fairly significant because they have to actually do the hard groundwork of regaining the support of the labor unions, who are fairly disgruntled with the ANC. And so if they can scoop up enough labor union support, they might actually have a showing in the municipal elections, although who knows what that is going to look like. We have an example for how well they'll do so far in Umfuleni. This is a very much talked about by-election because the DA won this. They won by, I think, 7 votes, a very narrow margin. And the reason that they managed to win was almost entirely because of 2 factors. Now, the DA have taken a lot of credit for this, and some of it they really do deserve, in the sense that they have done enormous amounts of good campaigning. They stuffed a lot of money into that little by-election campaign, and it was a big propaganda win. But the one factor beyond their control is the decline of the ANC, and the particular shape that this takes is a decline in voter participation. So what that's mean is the ANC has been declining in very, very steadily for every election for a number of years now, about a decade or more. And so the DA were just waiting there to pick that up. But what pushed them over the boundary was the 3% that the South African Communist Party won. And if they were on the ANC ticket, probably wouldn't have seen the ANC lose that by-election. So that's worth bearing in mind that the South African Communist Party, they're probably not going to win a huge amount, but their ability to threaten the ANC and pull them below certain thresholds, particularly now that they're so vulnerable, it's actually a strong bargaining card. And the question of whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa actually has the, um, how should I put it, will to resist them if they make an offer to rejoin if they step down, it's a big question, especially going into the next elections, because I think at least this time around they're going to stand firm and they're going to say, look, we want to make our mark and demonstrate our capacity to erode support, right? And with the ANC being where it is, the few points that they could lose, let's say it's consistently 3 to 5% of the black population, because there are not a lot of people outside of the black majority who are going to vote for them. Let's say they manage to get 3 to 5% of the black vote in several key areas, maybe 2 to 3% nationally. That is not a huge amount, but it might be enough to convince the ANC to bring them back into the fold in exchange for certain concessions. What those are remains to be seen. But at the moment, they're accusing the ANC of harassing their members ahead of the polls. So, yeah, they're trying to say that, voters have to choose sides, blah, blah, blah. We'll see how that turns out. And then there's also one on Mark Burke. Now, this was the other one that I actually should have done at the head, which is the details, which is to detail the Mark Burke. Let me just find where I've put the notes on Mr. Burke. Draft legal procurements, where we got that's the Ingrain SA notes. Blah, 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 blah. Come on, it's somewhere, you silly sausage. There we go. Mark Burke. So now, what I noticed was interesting is that a couple of things that I picked up when I was trying to sort of look into the background of this guy, because there's very little on him. Well, not very little, but like he's not like the biggest personality in the DA. He's not very charismatic. He speaks very slowly and haltingly. He's clearly not a dumb guy, or he wouldn't be where he is. But his sort of background. I mean, he's only 2 years older than me, and so very, very successful. So what he does is, once he's graduated, he gets internships with FNB. He's a researcher for the and has roles at several investment groups, and he starts a company called Expand Rand, which handled money transfers for expatriates. And then in 2013, when he was in the UK, he joined the Lib Dems. Now, that was an interesting time period in my mind because Ryan Coetzee, big advisor of the DA, what he did is he went up with the DA and Helen Zille in 2012 when they visited Charter House. Now, Charter House is the biggest and most prestigious think tanks. It's at the headquarters of the biggest and most prestigious think tank in the UK, which is the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Now, that came out of what used to be called the Round Table Group or the Milner Group, which is the semi-secret society that was put together by Rhodes, Milner, Rothschild, and Rosebery, and Alfred Beit, to take over South Africa and instigate a war down here over 100 years ago. So the creation of South Africa is a child of this institute, and they have a South African branch called South African Institute of International Affairs. And they do a lot of research and advocacy themselves, right? But the key thing is that around about the 20s or 30s, that interwar period, they were largely taken over by the Fabian Society. And today, a lot of the big ticket people over there will, when they're doing sort of a big sort of policy push or anything, will often have appearances from, big Fabian figures like Tony Blair or the Miliband brothers, right? So during this time in 2012, Helen Zille makes this big interview, which you can find online. She does an interview at Charter House in which she lays out the case basically for why And this is like 2 months after Marikana. This is in October. She lays out the case for why Julius Malema should be pushed out of the ANC and allowed to start his own party, weaken the ANC and create the case for a coalition between the DA and the ANC. And she says that she would love to work with Jacob Zuma and Trevor Manuel on implementing ANC policy and demonstrating that it can work. It's an extraordinary interview, right? But the other thing she does in that interview is she puts forward Ryan Coetzee as someone that needs to be introduced into this network and be given a job. Although I don't think she actually mentions a job, but she mentions the introduction, right? And very soon after, Ryan Coetzee is hired by the Liberal Democrats, and his main sort of patronage contract in the British system for many years was Lord Peter Mandelson, a very senior member of Blair's cabinet, a long-running Fabian, and recently caught in a very severe Epstein scandal. Very, very close ties with Epstein. So Ryan Coetzee got involved with this, and then he ran their re-election campaign after the coalition with the Conservative Party in, I think, 2015 or something like that. And he botched it terribly. I mean, the strategy he went for was everything's working just grand. The Conservative Party has the best policies. And it's like, okay, well, then why are we voting for you? So they lost half their voter support. And then he went and did the Brexit campaign. He was hired by Peter Mandelson to go and do the Brexit campaign. There was also a sort of financial scandal involved with his hiring at the Liberal Democrats because apparently, according to some news reports I dug up, there was £100,000 that was paid to him, which didn't strictly come from the Liberal Democrats' coffers, but came out of a government fund. I don't really know what happened to that money after that. I couldn't find any follow-up information after that article. It was in The Guardian, actually. So, left-leaning, etc., but never mind. After he failed with the Liberal Democrat campaign, he was hired to do Brexit, and he did the Remain campaign, which was labeled Project Fear. And, well, this... excuse me. Very tight chest at the moment. So he pushed the idea that, okay, well, the sky will fall if we leave the EU, and everyone voting Brexit is racist. Now, I'm sure he believes this very sincerely, but it didn't work. And it was widely regarded as hyperbole and was called Project Fear. What would have been a slam dunk, according to the polls, not long before this campaign, it turned into, well, we know the 52-48 swing that we got. And they left the EU after the establishment fought very hard to try and water the deal down as much as possible, but such is life. And then he went on to work for a company called Consulum. He was a CEO or something like that for Consulum, and Consulum was formed out of the ashes of Bell Pottinger. And if you know what Bell Pottinger is, it was a company that did PR for Jacob Zuma back in 2015, 2016, around there. And they did all of this stuff about white monopoly capital. It's why that term is so well known now in South Africa. They made out of it this great white racial conspiracy to take over South Africa and reintroduce apartheid and all this as a distraction for Jacob Zuma's problems and whatever. And the PR campaign was exposed. And once a PR campaign like that is exposed, the company can't do business anymore. So they dissolved. But a lot of their executives went off to found Consulum, and they brought in Ryan Coetzee to run it. And after a few years, because I actually spoke to a couple of people who've worked for this company, and what he'd been doing, I mean, aside from the stuff that you can find in the public domain, he helped run PR for China's takeover of Hong Kong. He did PR for a lot of Saudi figures, as well as the Saudi government. A whole bunch of nasty people. He's supposedly some kind of humanist liberal Democrat who cares about human rights and all of this, but money is money. And but speaking to some former employees years ago, well, I mean, I wrote the article like 2 years ago for my now defunct newspaper that I'm going to wait until 2028 to revive that. But anyway, what he did is he basically ran all of his very talented employees very, very ragged. He made them work out like 12, 14-hour days. And so there was a high rate of burnout and a high rate of staff turnover. And the staff turnover was so high that they actually couldn't keep track of the contracts that they had with their longest serving partners, one of which being the Saudi government. And so they dropped a few balls and it didn't look very good. So they lost a lot of revenue. And one of the last contracts that he took in the company before selling it to Stagwell, which is a UK sort of PR and consulting company. One of the last contracts he took was to run the GNU negotiations on behalf of the DA. And I mean, I needn't tell you how that worked out, but one detail that comes out of Tony Leon's latest book is that one of the opening offers that the DA made in negotiations before real negotiations had even begun was to give up sealed mandates. Now, giving up sealed mandates is the reason that, as I mentioned earlier, Ryan Coetzee now has to oversee ANC cadres making money off of a deal with the Zimbabwean government. It's because sealed mandates mean that the minister controls his own policy in his own department, his own hiring. And by giving that up, they've meant that they handed over complete control to the ANC over almost every aspect of how they're running their departments. So there goes it. I mean, I guess, it means that when they were talking about red lines with all of these different policies, like, Bella and expropriation of compensation, all this, from the get-go, they knew that all of those red lines were not red lines at all, and they were bullshitting the public. But this is not about Ryan Coetzee. This is about Mark Burke. The thing about him starting to work for the Liberal Democrats in 2013 is that there is only one contact he could have possibly had to rely on to get a job from that organization, a significant job from that organization. That would have been Ryan Coetzee. At least that's the maths in my mind. I could be wrong. But when he comes back to South Africa, he founds a company called Castello. So now they talk about financial inclusion. Now, financial inclusion is basically when you try to drive for poor people to get bank accounts. That's it, right? And then they do crypto arbitrage services. That's one of the things that's been fingered is he has been doing a lot of forex transactions, and the idea is that it violates the capital controls regulations in South Africa. But one of the other things that they've mentioned in some of the charges is that they've been using the forex trades to hide crypto speculation trades. Don't know if that's the case. We're going to have to wait for the investigation to come out. But that would be a violation. If it's true, it seems like that would be a violation of the end user agreement he signs with the investors in his company. This is the account, generally speaking, right? And what he did when he became an MP is he handed over the company to his brother to say, okay, well, I don't have any conflict of interest. And this particular company was not listed under his lists of commercial interests when he submitted this to the government. I think that's correct. I should make sure, but I have seen those forms, and people have been touting the fact that, well, is it there? It's not there. Anyway, one of the big things about this is that in the 23-24 financial year, he donated 105,000 rand to the DA. It was declared with the IEC, legal and above board. And then in the next fiscal cycle, he donates an additional couple 100,000, so that in that little period, he donated a total of over 400,000 Rand to the DA. And this comes around the time that he was selected to be an MP. So there's an implication over at least an appearance of having bought his position as MP. So that's not a good look. So now, and the thing is, he's also a federal finance chairperson. You know, yeesh. So, I mean, the previous guy in that position was Dion George, who, by all accounts, was very, very good at his job, even if he's completely obsessed with green energy and all of that kind of stuff. He was very, very aggressive in that role as Minister of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment. But he was kicked out by John Steenhuisen, and that's old history. So Mark Burke is in for a bumpy ride at the moment. But, you know, his position is that, oh, well, he's resigned from Costello, and so he's no relations with us. But, I mean, his brother's in charge of the company. It doesn't convince anyone. Now, it's worth noting at this point now that one of the big things that's coming out of the group of people who call themselves the centre-right in South Africa, that would be Frans Cronje, James Mayburg, and so on. And I love these people. I really do. They give some great insight, but they also have their own little agenda and perspective. And in my mind, they're a little bit too much focused on ANC versus DA dynamics. And so what they end up doing is they've got this idea, okay, well, this is a regime-friendly criticism, a smear campaign against Mark Burke. I don't know. I think that's a little bit too strongly stated. Now, sure, it's in the interest of the more established patronage networks and so on. This is true. And it's part of a long series of approaches by the media to focus on the scandals that the ANC has dug up or that Steenhuisen blabbed about on his way out from his very dismal, position. And the idea is that they're running a campaign to make the DA look like the ANC in terms of their qualities. Now, I don't think that would have been... any reasonable person will still, at the end of the day, go, yeah, okay, the DA are not as squeaky clean as they've appeared so far. They are in the national spotlight now, after all. But it does slightly water down their, perfect burnished image. Now, I mean, in my mind, I think, that's more than offset by the perfume of success. So just showing winning and gaining power, that does a lot for your performance in the elections. So they're probably getting a decent bump just out of that. And I think it'll more than offset the bad press, if I'm being perfectly frank. And as much as I love James Mayburg, I think he's a bit over-egging the pudding in this regard. I think that it's a wait-and-see thing. Is Mark Burke actually guilty of these things? That requires forensic audits and all kinds of stuff. And look, if he's was trying to find a way to get around capital controls, more power to him, and I hope he gets away with that. If that's what he was been doing. So I don't want to be too silly. I'm not how should I put it? I'm not an establishment respecter, but it seems a little unwise, and it seems a little cowboyish, at least superficially, and that's not really what the kind of guy you want to be running national finance departments. That said, there's no way he could possibly be worse than some of the guys at the ANC punts. So, there is that. Well, I just think that his defense of his behavior, because his company got a blocking order from the South African Reserve Bank, and the and the High Court ruling involved with this only established reasonable suspicion sufficient for the blocking order. So there's no proven contraventions or personal wrongdoing. And of course, everyone's making hay out of it as much as they can. EFF, ANC, MK Party, all of them going, woohoo, look, the white man is corrupt. But honestly, I mean, all of this comes across like the Mandela campaign in '94, where he said, look at this 9 million rand corruption scandal. It's the biggest corruption scandal this country's ever seen. When the ANC comes to power, that'll be a thing of the past. It's that kind of silly hypocrisy. I mean, no one takes it seriously. So the only real danger to the DA that I can see right now is, well, it's kind of a double-edged sword if you're trying to have a sort of unified center perspective. Then it's a double-edged sword for you. Because what happens is, if the court case succeeds and Mark Burke is found guilty of some kind of legal contravention, whatever it is, that's going to hurt the DA's public perception at least a little bit. And what it's also going to do is damage the DA's internal confidence quite significantly. Now, the other side of this is, if they charge him and fail to carry it through, and he doesn't get prosecuted, and he does actually, end up coming clean and returning to his post and all of that kind of stuff, it makes the institutions driving the prosecution, including the South African Reserve Bank itself, look corrupt. Now, that may not seem like much, but the Reserve Bank is considered the most ironclad, corruption-proof institution in the country. If that turns out to be a politically driven campaign, it looks incredibly bad for South African investment. And a lot of big names who are looking at this will think, oh shit. So I think, because we haven't seen any massive moves as a result, I think the likelihood is that everyone's holding their breath and waiting to see how it turns out. But it could be a big shock, one way or the other. So, not great. This is not good news. Anyone who's sort of getting schadenfreude about this, it's not good news. Okay, I've definitely now exhausted all of the deep dive stuff, and I'm going to continue with the little news roundup. So, what do we got? ANC mayoral shortlist. Big farce, because the ANC named 42 possible mayoral candidates for 8 metros ahead of the local elections. Now, every other party's finalized their lists. They've got their candidates. They've started campaigning. ANC are going, we don't know who's going to stand in the post. So you've got 226 names put forward across 50 municipalities. That's not all of them. We've got like 200 odd municipalities. So, and I mean, the names put forward for Joburg, for example, are absolute useless wankers like Morero and Masuku, right? And, none of these names look good. But they had enormous infighting over this, and it's made them look really bad, because they can't do basic campaigning anymore. They're completely falling apart. But the MK Party's also got some internal tensions, right? You've got political analysts warning about potential assassinations, which isn't a surprise. It happens a lot in that province. It's the most violent for political assassinations. And they actually had a huge number of members storming their Durban offices, looking for Jacob Zuma to hold him accountable for parachuting candidates in which replaced the community nominees. So Jacob Zuma, by all accounts, is running the ANC in the MK in very similar way to how he ran the ANC. In that it's very top down. You've got super delegates. You've got sort of, which allows you to parachute in appointees much more easily. Ramaphosa has reformed the ANC to be much more democratic, which makes bribing candidates harder. It makes manipulating the process harder. And that's part of why the party is falling apart, because you've got a lot of real competition at the branch level and internally at almost every level. And it's going to make it very hard to parachute in guys like Patrice Motsepe, which is what the establishment really wants. And by the establishment, I don't mean like ANC cadres. I mean, major oligarchs, NGO interests, foreign interests, all that kind of stuff, all is one. A lot of people want Patrice Motsepe, but it's going to be difficult, and the internal party members are not the same as the general public. And so when people get the general public's opinion polls on Motsepe, it doesn't really tell you how he's going to fare inside the party, and you can't. The way that Ramaphosa won was with a massive injection of dodgy money, which resulted in very violent branch level competition. That's a whole long story on its own. But Zuma seems to be plowing through because he doesn't have that obstacle in his party, right? And the big thing that they're getting accused of, and this is a very, very interesting detail, is they want the complainants were demanding the sacking of Willie Mchunu. Okay, now there's other people they don't like, but who William Mchunu is back in 2016, leading up to the leadership election in the ANC. There was a battle for the what was the term, like the provincial chair, I think it was, between William Mchunu and Senzo Mchunu. Now, they're not related. It's just a common Zulu surname. Senzo Mchunu, the battle between them cost, I think, 60 dead councillors. That's not even accounting for all of the stuff that happens with aligned taxi cartels and trucking cartels, because the targeted assassinations in that political cycle were huge, absolutely huge. Now, Senzo Mchunu goes on to become the police minister. And the whole cycle in the Madlanga Commission that's going on now, the investigation into hit squads being associated with Senzo Mchunu, that's a big deal. So Ramaphosa has been looking after that guy. And on the other side of that conflict in KZN, Zuma is looking after his opponent from 10 years ago. And the other sort of complaint is that he's prioritizing ANC defectors, recent ANC defectors. Yeah. So old battles still being fought. It's worth paying attention to for that. The other thing that the MK's got involved with, as well as the some piddling little group called United Africans Transformation, they filed an urgent application to appeal to the Western Cape High Court against a full bench judgment which dismissed their challenge to Cyril Ramaphosa and the Parliament's impeachment process, right? So what they're looking for is punitive costs against Ramaphosa, and claiming procedural defects, delaying tactics, and so on. And they named a whole bunch of people, including the Speaker of Parliament. The impeachment process, Ramaphosa is dragging it out a lot, but he's got a lot to answer for. And I mean, look, Thabo Mbeki got away with the arms deal, and Zuma is going to be prosecuted for being involved in the same arms deal that was instigated by Thabo Mbeki next year. He managed to delay it by 25 years. It's absolutely extraordinary. But Mbeki got away with not a single charge because a lot of his backers are also Ramaphosa backers. And Zuma's attitude when he was in charge was just sort of live and let live. It's over now, I've won. Which is an extraordinary magnanimous thing if you consider, what's at stake. But, ancient history. If Ramaphosa goes for an impeachment charge, it's like, well, can the DA actually survive voting against it? Him being caught with his fingers in the till with the whole Pala scandal. He involved the late president of Namibia in trying to cover it up. Absolutely extraordinary nonsense and shenanigans. But you can read about that at your own pleasure. There's also, the ANC pledging to cut municipal debt to Eskom and water boards by at least 30% by 2031. So this, in a way, is just kind of patching, it's like putting a little elastoplast on a stab wound. It's not working because look, they owe something like 100 billion to Eskom, the water boards. 161 billion, sorry. And look, you can put a dent in that, but I mean, if you consider how much they need to do in terms of updating the infrastructure and so on, you're looking at a number like 10 times that size nationally. And he is only committing to cutting that debt by 30%, balancing the books by 30% on just the debt they owe in late paid fees to those utilities companies. So, yeah, I mean, it's really dismal reading. And then whether he'll be able to meet it is anybody's guess, because he's also talking about like, oh, more than half the municipalities will get clean and unqualified audits and on-time payment and all of that. And I don't know how they're going to achieve that. I mean, most of the municipalities can't wipe their own bums. A lot of illiterate and unqualified people and crooks in charge. So now they also announced that you've got like 81 strategic integrated projects valued at 2 trillion rand total. And I mean, this is big stuff, and a lot of it is new infrastructure. It's not repairing existing infrastructure, which actually is a much higher priority, in my opinion, because you're going to get a lot of infrastructure failure piling up over the next few years. And the closer these systems get to expiry, the more expensive it is to patch on a day-to-day basis. Leaks there, power failures there, all of that. So, yeah. And then, little treat for tomorrow. EBSCO released an academic article from the International Journal of Discrimination and the Law, talking about colored experiences with discrimination by the Black majority. And I will get into that tomorrow. That should be a very interesting little dive, because there's some peripheral sort of facts and things that I think will be nice to add to the picture, in addition to whatever comes up there. And I know it's not a very sort of statistics heavy study, but it gets very little attention. And so I think it'd be a nice thing to do a single cover on. Then what we've also got is a giant meth lab raid, which happened in Limpopo near the Zimbabwean border. And it was run by 2 Mexicans, 2 Zimbabweans, and a Malawian. So they got 600 million rands worth of drugs and equipment out of there, plus a whole bunch of cash. And look, for a while, the Latin Americans have been making an inroads into South Africa, mainly in the manufacturing end of business. But I am terrified of the idea of these people getting involved, because look, as bad as organized crime is in South Africa, how should I put it? There's an ecosystem and an established pattern of conduct. And we know how to get along with that. The second you introduce new foreign elements into the criminal underworld, it changes those patterns. And there's a lot more people that get hit by the shrapnel, and it doesn't feel good to me that they're getting involved. But if you want sort of deeper dives on that, you have to go to a site called GI Talk. There's an organization called GI Talk. They do incredibly detailed work on organized crime. Like their quarterly reports will do like neighborhood maps of Cape Town showing which gangs are in charge of what areas. It's beautiful work. Beautiful work. So that's GITOC. Look them up. You will be fascinated. It's good stuff. Now, there's a little bit of a hiccup for gated communities and estates, because there's a High Court ruling which clarified that the homeowners associations that run these things, they may restrict a resident's digital visitor app access during a levy dispute without committing spoliation, provided the resident retains physical or biometric access to the home itself. Now, that's weird. I assume that means like escorted access and so on. But the department sort of, the government has sort of issued a statement saying they shouldn't do that and they should watch out. And so this could be a new area of legal conflict, because you've got a lot of debt load on middle-class South Africans. And so the rate of default, especially with certain looming international economic issues, like the raising, the potential massive rise in oil price that'll come, out of the American-Iran war, which America has been buffering with its strategic supplies. So that's going to run out eventually. You've got, and so I don't know, when the petrol price goes to the roof down here, which it's already still steadily rising, and the electric prices are rising a lot. So it's going to have a knock-on effect on people who are heavily indebted, and that's going to result in defaults and all kinds of things that'll affect this particular story. And given the squatters' rights problems and so on, I don't know how that's going to turn out. It could be bad for estates if there's a lot of defaults, um, or it could turn out to be fine, and they learn to react in an agile way and shut people out. But not either way, it doesn't sound too lacquer. And then you've got the SADC chairmanship, which I mentioned earlier. So we've assumed the chairmanship of our regional free trade area. And there's a big conference going on in Durban. The closing statement's already been given last week. And of course, naturally, the main thing being discussed is xenophobia and anti-migrant protests and so on. But yeah, we still haven't recovered to intra-regional trade. We haven't recovered to pre-pandemic levels, and manufacturing share of GDP has been falling. Regional growth is very modest for the continent. So yeah, it remains to be seen what they're going to do, and I can have a nice big look at that next week, maybe. One of the funnier things that I picked up on is that WhatsApp is now going to charge businesses operating on their platform 12 cents per reply to customers. Now, previously the replies were free, and now that, I mean, it's going to affect banks, it's going to affect lots of big companies. And if you put out 10,000 marketing messages, it's now going to cost you 6,200 rand. It's not going to be lacquer. And so I I foresee a lot of grumbling about this. But now we've had anti-immigrant enforcement as well. So funnily enough, these stories on anti-immigrant, there's a whole bunch of them, and I only picked one of them because they're all more or less saying the same thing. They were only covered on the BBC African Creole service, bizarrely enough. So it's in. I wrote my notes down here in normal English, but it was it was very odd to read it. So Pidgin English, not African Creole, Pidgin English. SAPS welcomes the sentencing of a couple of foreign nationals to 6 years for illegal presence, and they'll face deportation after serving time. Now, as I understand it, the arrangement with Zimbabwe is hopefully to get the time served in Zimbabwe instead of here, just because of the enormous load that Zimbabweans have on our services. But in this case, we're looking at, them trying to make these announcements, and then the media kind of going, let's not touch that. And I think the reason for that is that for the most part, the media doesn't like the anti-immigrant rhetoric. And so if the government's trying to announce a success in that department, they don't really know what to say about that, because on the one hand, they can't be celebrating it, but on the other hand, they can't be saying that the government's doing nothing, because either way, you play into the opposition narrative. So now we have also an investigation into 4 fatal building collapses in which 17 people died. Now there was widespread non-compliance. No shit, hey? I'm not surprised. The problems with no plans or permits, missing structural drawings, unnotified work, and construction on high-risk dolomitic land. So this is separate from the George collapse from 2024, and one of the big problems that came out of that was the I think the mayor of Georgia at the time was interviewed on Caxton Media, which is only local news, and so almost nobody saw it, but I caught it. And he was saying like, "Oh well, we just don't have anyone who can monitor." But like even in the Western Cape, where they got the best municipal services in the country, they don't have anyone who can actually inspect buildings. It's absolutely stunning. It really is stunning. You can build as shoddy as you like, and no one's going to come and check up on you. Really bad. It's a surprise we don't have more buildings collapse. And then the SAHRC is looking into data centers and trying to stop them, with climate change NGOs trying to get involved. Now, I'm ambivalent about this. I don't know if we need data centers. We're kind of doing fine without them. They don't create a lot of jobs, and they don't funnel a lot of special talent in, but they also don't hurt too much either. I feel sorry for anyone who has to live near them because of the noise pollution and so on. And they will put increased pressure on electrical prices. So it's not the greatest thing, but it'll be interesting to sort of keep tabs on that and see if it wins out, because SAHRC does have a fair bit of clout with the courts. Now, yeah, where are we going? Mobile network ranking. I'm going to leave the telecom stuff off. The fuel prices are going up. They've gone up by R1.20 in the past year per liter. So, yeah. And I mean, it's funny because despite this, the inflation has dropped to 4.3% from 5%, whereas the fuel inflation is at 20%. It's very weird. I think we're getting inflation under control with it's mainly due to the way that they've been raising interest rates, really, because the government is really trying to rein in cost price inflation at the moment, because a lot of the reforms that they're pushing through will be very dangerous if inflation goes up at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and then again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of new independent power production. So this year we've had 17 new IPP projects with nearly 2 gigawatts that hit commercial operation. And these are projects that and there's another 28 projects that are expected to come online, adding another 2 gigawatts for a full year total of 4 gigawatts for the whole year. With and it's a fairly big sign. It's very good. But a lot of this is renewables. So it remains to be seen how it's going to affect baseload. I mean, that was what the original point of this new regulations are, because they're also talking about variable rates of input. And that's closing the door off the horses bolted, because, as I mentioned, the public-private partnerships that have been signed, these are very, very long deals. They are exempt from the new regulations just because of that, the framework that covers private partnerships. So the power surges and dips that will result from wind and electricity, the companies that provide that electricity will not be held accountable for any damages that result from that. Right? That's my at least that's how I understand it. Right, and then here's a big one that's going to be a problem. So the Pretoria High Court found that the social relief benefit, that's sort of like the universal basic income that a lot of people get, of 370 rand. I mean, look, it's pocket change, but a lot of people rely on it. Now, here's the thing. What the court ruled is that the government is not allowed to decrease that. It is now considered a permanent facility. And the court has already ordered progressive value increases, right? So yeah, it means that we now have court mandated universal basic income with an anti-austerity clause built in, which could be very bad. I mean, Ryan Coetzee, of all people, credit where credit is due. What he said is you can't have the courts preventing the government from having this kind of flexibility, and it seems to be an overstep on the part of the courts. But Supreme Court of Appeal hearing is scheduled. Remains to be seen what's going to happen. If that has to keep increasing every year, it's going to get big very quickly. We also reported 143 insolvencies in the month of July alone. So that took up the year-to-date total to just under 900 businesses going insolvent. So that's not good. And just some of the numbers on the green hydrogen project mentioned earlier. The Hive Hydrogen South Africa project is $5.8 billion for a green hydrogen ammonia project at Kucha in Nelson Mandela Bay. Construction is going to start in 2027. I mean, some of the projects on the west coast have already sort of gotten going, but this new one's going to add another node to the whole thing, and the power backing it is going to be renewables. There's they've commissioned to start adding in 2029 another 3 gigawatts of renewable energy. Again, big stress on the grid. Good to have the power, but it comes with a risk. Spain had a complete grid blackout. Was it earlier this year as a result from a power surge from renewables? So there are risks. Where we got. Employment is where it was always. Total participation rates are, in the 50s. You've got sort of official unemployment at 37.5 for women and 30% for men. The actual unemployment, if you include people who've given up on work, is much higher, in the 40s. So, yeah, I mean, this is our sort of situation. I mean, there's two more really important ones. Number one is the United States lifted a ban on research funding for South Africa. Now, so our director, our national health, National Institute of Health director, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, issued a member exempting NIH grants from a February executive order from Donald Trump, which halted foreign aid and assistance to South Africa. So, this is a thing that will touch on PEPFAR and other things, touch on some elements that were cancelled under PEPFAR and so on. But it's the collaboration that's on HIV and tuberculosis is unaffected by the lifting on that lifting of the USAID funding and so on. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on there, but I think that I need to revisit that just on the off chance that it might be slightly broader than health research, because I did note that they have made $1 million available for people who are researching into. Thanks, Willem Petzer, for reporting on that. I wouldn't have noticed otherwise, actually, because I hadn't been checking the news until again this week. I've been trying to slow my consumption of news down a bit. So they made $1 million available for research into trying to find routes to independent self-determination in South Africa, which is really shockingly interesting. If I had an NGO of my own, I would love to get that grant because I'm one of the people who's probably spent more time on that than almost anyone else. There are people who spent more time on it than me. It's true. Um, but yeah, it would be a great thing to catch some of the crumbs off that. Anyway, the last item I'm going to pick before I move on to solidarity and AfriForum stuff is that there's a draft natural sciences bill. And the public comment is already closed in May, and it would require mandatory registration with the government for practicing natural scientists, any form of scientist, with up to 1 year imprisonment for non-compliance. So you're literally now, it's going to be an imprisonable offense to conduct research without the express permission of a national department. And the professional fee is just shy of 2,000 rand, and there's some exemptions for government employees. But yeah, it's very dodgy. They claim that they're going to do it to protect the public and protect the environment, but I think everyone can tell this is a load of horse shit. It's a gatekeeping exercise. Not good. Really not good. Really not good. So that needs to be kept an eye on. Now, the AfriForum Solidarity, the civic sector. And there are not a huge amount of sexy stories here, but there is one that I think all of you will know about already, is that March and March met with AfriForum to learn from its advocacy strategies. There's a lot been made of this, but there's not actually a lot of details out there. And not because it's like not being reported on, but because there's not much to say. It certainly is a big deal, and the Common Sense made a big comment on calling it, Rainbow MAGA, which, yeah, but it's not really, because it's a completely different direction from the sort of dirigiste sort of central state construction thing that is MAGA. It's very much trying to pull away from the state. And a sort of very Zulu-centric black nationalist version of AfriForum would be very interesting to see. It remains to be seen if the sort of institutional culture can be carried over, because building an institution like AfriForum and indeed Solidarity drew on a lot of talented individuals who had experience with building these institutions in the private sector, in the union sector, so on and so forth. Now, March and March, they're also going to be appealing to a very populist base. So how much of a capital base they have to draw on for memberships and how much they're going to be able to offer people remains to be seen. Because of the economic populist aspect, it's quite likely that they're going to get into deep water very quickly, because people are going to want to see some form of handout, some sort of tangible stuff. And AfriForum's sort of services where they, we're going to see a few examples of their little victories soon. It's required many, many, many years for them to get up to the standard where they can actually do these things reliably. And for a population group where institutional learning is not as deep, where experience is not as deep, and where capital is not as deep, their ability to meet that standard is going to be severely hampered. And if they can't meet that standard quickly, they're in trouble, because they're already looking bad for doing business with AfriForum amongst their own people. And they're running a big risk. So they have to pull it off really, really well if they don't want to fall apart. It's a big gamble on their part, actually. Although, respect to them, they managed to have a very, very effective, and regardless of what you see in terms of the hysteria in the media, look, the things that they've been the bad things that have happened as a result from xenophobic protests are, we all know what they are. People get lynched, bad things happen. But the big protest they had at the end of the month, what was it, a month ago or so, was actually quite well behaved and quite organized. and the likelihood is that they do have a degree of organizational control. So if anyone can do this, it's probably going to be them, but we don't know what it's going to mean. We don't know what it's going to mean, and they could see their arse doing this kind of stuff. Okay. Anyway, the other thing is, so let's go through a couple of the wins from AfriForum. They welcome the dismissal of the of an Mpumalanga educational official. This is on Polity and a couple of other places. They got rid of the chief financial officer of the Department of Education in Mpumalanga due to a crooked laptop acquisition deal. They found out about it. They brought it to the prosecution and they pushed it through. And so they've gotten a scalp there. They've also reported, alleviating water shortages in Standerton. So it's a lot of, basic water redistribution through tankers and so on and so forth, right? But yeah, I mean, they're also doing a lot of stuff over there, doing firefighting, because you've got a big problems with fires in the area and not good firefighting services. So yeah, no, I'm reporting this just mainly so you can see a little cross section of what they're up to, and a lot of it's like local, and it's not incredibly sexy, but you can see things being done. They've pitched in Potchefstroom. They have started the process of addressing some of the pollution in the area by sending a strongly worded letter, which sounds weak, but it's always how these things begin, to the JB Marks local municipality, which is the muni that Potchefstroom is in. And they and the way they're doing this is they attach clear deadlines. You're going to address this by this date. You're going to make a statement by this date. Here's going to be the plan by this date. You're going to submit to this plan. And we are going to move on legal action if you don't. So obviously it's South Africa. You can imagine how bad it is. Sewage in the drinking water, sewage in the rivers, rubbish everywhere, and usual stuff. So that's sort of something that hopefully will be in the news again for positive reasons. And then here we go. Mfuleni back in the news again, committing to sewage infrastructure repairs following AfriForum's urgent court action. So, I mean, they've managed to force the municipality to repair its sewage. And they are already following up with a second part of their court application to make sure that they receive ongoing information and updates on the municipality's performance. So what they've done is that they're forcing the municipality to do their job, but they've also acquired a role as watchdog over that municipality with a court order, or at least they're in the process of doing so. So this is like they're strong arming the municipality and gaining control over it. It's really remarkable. Now in Uppington, there's also another sewage crisis, pollution in the Orange River. And, guess who's downstream in the Orange River? It's Orania. So this is actually a very big deal. And it's not just health risks to people who swim in the river or people who draw water from the river. It's also hypertrophy that affects fish life and affects downstream communities quite severely. So that's their next sort of thing. That's one of the big projects that they're going to be tackling is sewage dumping in Uppington. Now, hopefully, they're going to get what they got in Mfuleni, and if they get that kind of court ruling, they may be able to force the municipality to do the right thing. And that'll be very good for all involved, including Orania, who have to live downstream from this. Here we go. And then some of the cute stuff that they do as well, which I say cute, but it is quite important. They put up 64 new stop signs in this tiny little place in Volksrust. So it's, like if you're in a small place like that, I mean, it sounds petty, but having actual traffic signage is a fairly important deal, and this is one of the things that I think is worth noting here, and I think one of the things that we should be very, very grateful for in this part of the world is that the government actually doesn't have the appetite to punish people for getting their hands dirty fixing problems. In the UK, there's been a couple of stories this year, one of which I remember with some clarity. There was some young bugger who decided to literally just pick litter out of his river. So he goes up for about 2 kilometers. He clears out all of the rubbish by hand. And the local council sued him with potential jail sentences because there's some obscure little bylaw which says, well, if you clean more than 200 meters, then you're in violation of something that requires council permission and a council contract. That kind of behavior is not something you're going to see in South Africa, obviously because we're kind of desperate for things to work. But also, it's not in the mentality. People don't have the energy to sort of follow these really petty little cases, and the English absolutely do. So obviously, too, do the Germans, which you're undoubtedly going to be hugely surprised by. But it's something that I think it's a disease that is not present in Africa, is this particular kind of hysterical application of the rules. One of the things that I think Africa has in its favor is that if you're willing to get your hands dirty and fix things, to a large extent, you'll be left alone unless you're at a massive scale embarrassing specific officials. And in the case of AfriForum, the reason that they're not being touched is because of the political sensitivity. If the government goes after them, they've built up enough capacity now that they can embarrass the government. But they've also, in doing that, that whole cluster of organizations built up enough capacity that if they're really pushed, they can actually take huge chunks of territory out of the control of the government, out of the reach of law enforcement. And there were comments to this effect by Flip Base not too long ago. I think about a week ago, he released an article saying how they're building capacity to transfer services and concentrate control of their own affairs. And for my money, I think there's slightly more that needs to be done in that department. But again, it's one of those things where I feel in two minds about this. On the one hand, I want to see very tangible moves made towards consolidating capital and territory so that you aren't just sort of retreating, but actually changing reversing the trend by allowing yourself to do things that do development, automation and mechanization that reduces the dependence on labor, so on and so forth. And they're doing some of this, but the kind of instruments I have in mind are a bit more radical. But that said, if they were put under proper pressure, I think they'd be able to. They wouldn't have to move an extraordinary amount to completely block the government's ability to interfere with them, and I think that's a good sign. And and in the meantime, the media, which is on its way down, losing hundreds of thousands around every day. Media 24, Adrian Basson it has tried to come out at them and say, "Ooh, look, Kali Kriel is like Viljoen and Jacinta Zuma is like Buthelezi, and we're back to the 90s with all of these evil anti-Rainbow Nation people." And I think pretty much, there's a section of the population who will buy that, but they would be thinking it anyway. The people who are involved and a large swathe of the minorities will look at this and roll their eyes because it's like, what are you on about, mate? We're over 30 years later, completely different environment. The ANC are the bad guys. Everyone agrees. So what's he trying to get at? Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that we can sort of be grateful for is just that we're at the stage when none of these old narratives, which could have, I mean, some of the things that politicians could get away with saying 20 years ago. Um, I remind you, like I think he was Minister of Police at the time, Charles Ngakula, um, the late Charles Ngakula. He said in Parliament in 2004, he said um, he was pressed by, I think it was the DA or someone. Who knows? Maybe it was the media. I can't remember the context too clearly, but he's pressed about the homicide rate, which in South Africa is absolutely, everyone knows. It's insane. It's one of the worst in the world. And his response was, well, if you don't like the homicide rate, maybe you can leave the country. And now the callousness is still there, but the confidence isn't. I need to try and think, do you think any politician in the ANC right now could say something like that without getting absolutely buried? I don't think even News 24 would turn on them. You know, there's no one who wouldn't say, okay, this is inexcusably evil. But this is how the ANC has always thought. They just know now. And you can think about it. Think about the tone of the public discussion. It's completely different. And what I'll say over here is, look, the government's not going to reform. So I'm not suggesting you get your hopes up too high. And I'm also not suggesting that the private sector is going to hold out and be sparkly and perfect and they're going to save the day like Max de Pree says, because as I will cover this week in a written article, which I may read out in a stream later this week or next week or something. As this, what am I saying? BE is affecting the private sector too. It is damaging quality of services across the private sector. This will impact gated communities soon. There are structural effects that are going to damage your ability to remain in gated communities very soon. A lot of different things. So for my money, the salvation still lies in these civic organizations for the most part. That's what it seems like to me. But on the positive side, the fact that people are looking in this direction already, that very few people feel really confident in, I mean, even if you're looking at the people who are really, really dogmatic, especially the DA, who are really serious about this Rainbow Nation stuff, right? You can tell when you listen to any comment they make that they feel bitter and insecure about a lot of this. Helen Zille might be the only person in this country who stubbornly just doesn't have any doubts whatsoever. I don't know how she maintains her faith in this kind of stuff. I don't think it's warranted. But everyone else is pretty much looking for the exits one way or the other, whether they're looking to leave the country or find a little enclave outside of the system. And so I think a tipping point is coming one way or the other in the next couple of years, in which it may well become a sort of settled consensus that the central government is done for, the national project is done for, and we've all got to figure out our own shit. So I think that moment is not very far away. Whether it'll turn into meaningful action or not is a completely different question. And I don't want to tell you guys that things are going to be okay, but general attitudes, even people who are trying to shore up the center, people who are really, really big behind, okay, yes, we can. The Common Sense, for example, they issued an opinion article end of last week, an editorial, where they said the United States should stop backing the Afrikaners because it's bad press and they should really help back a broad-based national conservative movement, like rainbow conservative movement. And by this, they don't mean the sort of rainbow MAGA, as one of their staffers called this sort of AfriForum March and March collaboration. They're talking about, as I understand it, Patrice Motsepe being parachuted into the ANC, DA-ANC coalition getting stronger, doing a lot of public-private partnerships. Everyone makes a lot of money, economy grows. This picture. I'm not so sure. And I don't understand this particular stance either, for the simple reason that it's not necessary for America to back away from its support for Afrikaners to also support the center. They can do both, and it costs them almost nothing. So I don't know what's going through their heads right now. It's hard to say. I'm not in daily contact with anyone there anymore. So I just wanted to put a bookmark there to say that there are some people who are still very, very keen on trying to hedge their bets with like fixing the national system. But even when you read that, the rest of their comments says things like, okay, well, the enclaves are the solution. And by enclaves, they're sort of more talking about like private solutions, right? They've broadened their definition in the past month or so to sort of start leaning more civic and more ethnic rather than strictly the gated communities and so on. But I think everyone can see sort of that's where it's headed. And it shouldn't be controversial to say so. But it is worth noting how unusual that is for a national consensus, a quiet, tacit national consensus to be emerging saying, no one can fix this mess. Let's all go into our corners and sort our own stuff out, put our own oxygen masks on first. But there's a second layer to this. It has to hit, sort of the Spartacus moment. So yeah, everyone loves Spartacus, but someone has to stand up first and say, I am Spartacus, and for the others to go, oh yeah, I'm also Spartacus. The famous scene, and what I'm saying here is when it gets outside of the Afrikaner community, and we're starting to see it now with March and March, Jacinta Zuma, that lot. If it breaks that boundary and it starts to look attractive to the black population, everything's going to pull away from the center very rapidly, I think. And there's already some successes in the Zulu community. Now, it's a combination of traditional leaders, NGOs, political parties, and what have you. But in the past decade or so, they have replaced the vast majority of the toilet infrastructure, public toilet infrastructure. Now, that's including in townships and whatever, where you have to have publicly accessible toilets and so on. They've replaced a lot of the stuff that the government was just simply not doing across almost the entire province. And it's a very quiet and under-observed phenomenon that's very positive to note. And I think that the Zulus, even outside of their traditional groupings, traditional leadership and all that, there's actually a lot more potential for autonomous action there than I think people give them credit for. And if March and March's thing works out even a little bit, maybe they won't be able to be the ones who carry the torch to the finish line. But if they get the ball rolling, we could see a very rapid shift in consciousness amongst a huge number of people. And with that in mind, I wanted to, so it's a nice positive note to end on. Everybody happy. Time to end the stream. So just a quick note on our way out. In the description of this video, go down there right now. There are 3 links. Number 1, my book, which I'd very much like you to buy. Number 2, my Substack, which I'd very much like you to subscribe to. And I think what I'm going to do now is I think actually I should at least once a week put out an article that you can read for free, because I think too many of them are paywalled. And then finally, my link to my Twitter is over there. So if you want to go and chew my ear off over everything that I've done wrong, aside from the comments in the YouTube video, you can also go and attack me there. Although I do actually respond on Twitter, whereas I don't always respond on YouTube. So before I go, let me just have a look at the chat, and I'm only going to quickly skim. If you, it's a lot of things. I see a couple of repeat names like SwearMG over here. Hello, nice to have you. And then someone called JDT says, I'm becoming more and more concerned these days and feel like leaving South Africa. I'm doing so much and not getting any promotion due to my race. Now, I feel the same way about a lot of things. And the thought occurs to me a lot. And if it really gets desperate, I mean, there's a chance that, because like, I've got kids, I've got what have you, uh, there's a chance that even I will have to make that kind of leap if the opportunity presents itself. And so and I'm one of the biggest sort of stay in South Africa guys there is. But if needs be, you should take the opportunity. I mean, even the Dutch are trying to escape their country now. Um, I still need to reach out to the guy to try and talk to him, but there's a fellow called Jeroen Pols who's setting up Dutch colonies in Paraguay um, as an escape valve for the ridiculous nonsense that's happening in their country. So, yeah, you're not alone. Low Brown Takati, who I recognize from Twitter, says straight white males are the gold standard, the standard to which all must be measured and come up short, at least legally speaking. Hmm. Well, I think it's a bit rude to be boastful, but we have been performing slightly above the standard, um, historically speaking, and here in South Africa. And while I would hesitate to inflate our performance too much, um, I think we have been pulling far above our weight these past 32 years, and I think we've been getting slightly less appreciation than we deserve. Let's put it that way. Um, Stefan Jacobs says, also demographics, white men will be forced to relocate for job. We already are. I mean, if you look at the what's it called, the census results and all this, there are a lot of people who move every few years just to try and keep up with the job market and the few opportunities that remain. So, yeah. And then JDT saying it's also not easy to get into other countries. No, it absolutely isn't. It's not a piece of cake. Lobra on Tagati saying Zimbabwe is a museum itself to the ruins of Rhodesia. Yes. But I think they hit rock bottom. And once you hit rock bottom, the only way to go is up. And yes, the ordinary Zimbabweans are not going to be the primary beneficiaries. It's going to be government officials, foreigners, white people, right? But the opportunities are there if you have enough capital to set something up. And I've met a lot of people who've said so. From Zimbabwean taxi drivers up to rich white people who drift in and out of the Boerland and have things to say. So I think, Africa is a land of opportunity if you're ready for dealing with a lot of weird nonsense. And in many ways, people report that it's kind of easier to do business there than here because they won so decisively that there's actually not an insecurity about the race question there, and people are fairly chilled about it. So, I mean, look, Zimbabweans can be a bit arrogant about historical questions, but they're not going to give you nearly as much trouble for doing business as a white guy in Zimbabwe as over here, at least by all accounts. I can't say I have personal experience of this, but this is what I'm told. Have been seeing some rather legally actionable statements being made about Burke on Twitter. Yeah, you'll notice that I hedged my statements very carefully when I was mentioning him because we don't actually know what's true yet, and I think it's smart to be reserved about this and not get too excited because it's kind of bad news either way, and let's not be too vicious. It's been pointed out that my buy me a coffee is still going for the Cape and yeah, I'm well aware of that, but I don't have access to that anymore. Some time ago, there was a persistent campaign to hack into every single one of my social media accounts. I had phishing attempts from everything. And then eventually someone managed to brute force their way into a couple of my passwords. So I lost the buy me a coffee. And I lost, what else did I lose? It was something trivial, but I can't remember what it was. Um, and yeah, there were a couple of bad things. They got into my Twitter account briefly and installed a bit of installed a spyware app on my account, which I quickly removed and then changed my password. But it was all in the same time period, and I was getting messages on WhatsApp, and one of them was from someone posing as a source that I had on a story in uh, Hermanus, and it's like an obscure thing. So it really sort of got my paranoia up quite substantially that I was being sort of monitored by someone, either with, either like one of those really obsessive people who are with, like, I don't know what's it called, like busting the myth or whatever, because there are a couple of buggers associated with that circle who've been quite nasty and petty, and they've shouted pretty much at anyone on the right and tried to do silly bugger stuff. I also got paranoid enough to consider some kind of element of either the DA or the police or something, but it's quite possible that it's just like an ordinary sort of scammer. But I did lose that, yeah. So I don't know what to tell you. It's gone. Um, comment. Let's say, has anyone been following the developments of the Alberta independence referendum? I have not, but I am assured that it isn't not going to turn into anything meaningful. So I haven't been too excited about it. I can check up on it and maybe do something next week if the next time I do this. Um, okay, anything else? And then Stefan Jacob was saying, yeah, so I need to, yeah, you do need to cancel your Buy Me a Coffee subscription. Yeah, please do. I don't want some random Nigerian to be getting your money. Please do cancel that, because, yeah. Anyway, cheerio. Thank you all for coming, and I'm going to end this